You're muted, Ebony.
Thank you. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our National Housing Resource Center's Leaders in Housing Counseling webinar. Today is Thursday, April 7th, 2022. My name is Ebony. I am the Administrative Manager here at the National Housing Resource Center, and I will be navigating this webinar today. Before we move on, I do have a few items that I'd like to go over. If you need closed captioning for this webinar, it has been enabled. All you have to do is toggle your mouse down towards the bottom of the screen and click the CC button. The PowerPoint presentation for this webinar will be included in the chat box of this webinar if anyone wants to access it. Also, if there are any links that we mentioned throughout this webinar, they will be included also in the chat box. So if you need to access them, you can copy and paste it really quick. There will be a portion of question and answers at the end of David's presentation. So we ask that if you have any questions to add them to the Q&A box, which is located at the bottom of your screen and not the chat box. I repeat, please add any questions that you may have for David and his team in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the screen. So that's it. That's all I have for you today. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and he will take it from here.
Thanks so much, Ebony, and welcome everybody to the call. We have, I hope, a very valuable discussion coming up, and I have to confess, I am certainly one of the guilty parties in doing the chat versus the Q&A, and so please put your questions in the Q&A. We promised David that there would be a vibrant conversation here, and so I'm sure you all have lots of issues you'd like to raise, and the great thing about David Berenbaum and his team is that they have been very open to really having these kind of conversations with us. So let me just do a quick rundown on what the agenda looks like. We're going to open up with just the latest on what's happening in the legislative side from the work that Christy's been leading and kind of the critical issues that we have there. And then I'll do a quick a couple updates of things that I thought you should know about that we're working on. You know, we generally do thematic meetings, but I also kind of want to tell you about things that are in the hopper so that you're kind of aware of them and there are opportunities to contribute to them before they're fully fleshed in. So I'll just mention a couple things that are getting a lot of our attention right now. But really, the bulk of our call will be devoted to working with David Berenbaum and the HUD Office of Housing Counseling team, and we're very interested in what they have to say. I think they're doing lots of exciting initiatives. Obviously, it has a big impact on our work, and also that you all have a lot of information in the field that would be helpful to share with them. So we're very glad that they're engaging with us today. So with that, let me turn it over to Christy so that she can give us the update on the legislative side.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Bruce. Happy Thursday and opening day of baseball to all the fans out there. So first, on the budget reconciliation bill, as you know, Build Back Better isn't happening right now. However, conversations to renew negotiations on this are expected to continue in the future after the Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, gets confirmed through the Senate within the next hour. She will become the first Black woman elected to the highest court. And so this is a monumental day. After this happens, Democrats will renew negotiations on this. Specifically, Senator Manchin is interested in discussing this April through May during Senate's work period. He wants to reach a scaled back version of Build Back Better. He's very interested in combating the inflation and restoring fairness in our tax system. So he wants to raise revenue by increasing taxes on top earners. He'd like to pay off part of the national debt with the raised revenue and lower drug costs, but as well as fund priorities in the budget reconciliation bill. So funding will be tight for all the competing interests and various programs, But earlier this week, the Congressional Progressive Caucus met with the White House, and they highlighted the need for housing investments in any budget reconciliation bill. So we are expecting some support there, and as well as Chairman Brown also said he's prioritizing housing in any form that develops from Build Back Better into a bill. And House and Senate members are expected to go on a 2-week recess for Easter starting on Monday, and they'll be back after the 22nd of April. So we could hear more on this after then. And next, I want to cover the appropriations process. Last Monday, President Biden released his budget request for FY23. So this kickstarted the FY23 appropriations process. The president requested to provide HUD programs with $71.9 billion in discretionary funding. And this is approximately $6.2 billion more than in FY22. In his proposal, President Biden did propose to increase access to housing choice vouchers by $32 billion to renew all existing housing choice vouchers, but as well as to expand assistance to an additional 200,000 households. So that if enacted, this would be the largest expansion of the program in its history. And then for housing counseling assistance, the president proposed $65.9 million as opposed to the $86 million that he proposed last year. So this is significantly less. We are still going to advocate for $100 million towards housing counseling assistance this year. Interestingly, the president proposed $115 million towards a pilot program through the FHA and Home for a complimentary loan and down payment assistance to expand home ownership opportunities for first generation and first time buyers. So earlier this week, we met with House Financial Services to gauge how they feel about that proposal. And they seem to believe that the pilot program that President Biden proposed is less robust than the first generation down payment assistance under Build Back Better, specifically because of the fact that it's a pilot program. So that sends a message that it's not ready to be fully enacted, but that is not the case for them. So we will keep that in discussion for any budget reconciliation bill in the future. And then in terms of Congress, they will respond to President Biden's proposal. Congressional House and Senate committees will draft their proposals and vote on them. So I've heard that House and Senate committee chairs are eager to move quicker than last year. However, that may not be possible because of the short election year calendar. And yeah, we may see a continuing resolution starting October 1st that would fund the government through the end of the year. And then depending on what happens after the midterm elections, if Republicans take control of the House and the Senate, they may delay the process with another continuing resolution into the next year. So yeah, we are working on submitting programmatic request letters to various House and Senate offices before the deadline. Specifically, we've submitted 30 programmatic requests so far, and we plan to submit more. And then lastly, I do want to mention that we have a sign-on letter. I will insert the link in the chat. So one thing you can do to show support for housing investments is sign on to this letter. We need support from all states, all jurisdictions to show Congress that we need housing investments in FY23 that are historic now more than ever. So please click on the link. I will insert it in the chat right now. And that is all on my end, and I will pass it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, so just in case anybody missed that plug, that's our annual sign-on letter for housing counseling funding to the House and Senate. It's mailed, it's sent to all the members of the House and Senate, but it's aimed at the appropriators. And so this is a big deal for us and a big deal for you. And we're making the pitch for $100 million. This gets some attention when it happens. And so the critical thing for us is that every state get represented. I think Christy mentioned this, but let me just underline that, if you're from Kansas, if you're from South Dakota, we used to have some trouble in South Carolina, but guys have totally stepped up. So we definitely need all the states. Talking to you, Nebraska, and Alaska always comes through. We really appreciate that. And, it's so the whole thing is that you want House and Senate representatives to look at the list and see, oh yes, I'm seeing local groups here supporting this. And obviously, many of you have participated in the calls that Christie's organized with House and Senate offices, and that's really helpful to have the local voices there. We'll keep doing that during the course of the year, but the sign-on letter touches everybody. So let me just talk a little bit about generally, that our focus at NHRC is really to figure out how to keep housing counseling to be financially sustainable, how to make it grow financially and in a sustainable way, but also how to make it grow organizationally and how to make it grow in terms of production and reputation and impact, especially on low and moderate income communities, communities of color, all those issues. And so we have lots of different projects we're working on. I'm not going to touch on many of them because, we do get to talk to you periodically about them. There are two that I wanted to mention to you that are just surfacing right now. So one's the Black Homeownership Collaborative. As you know, we did a lot of work with them last year, and it was very helpful, especially around the down payment assistance and first generation down payment assistance. This year, we're in charge of the housing counseling work stream along with Lot Diaz and from Unidas US. We are doing, and we had a really good meeting this week with them. And one thing that really jumped out among players was the difficulties that people have who are first-time home buyers coming into today's marketplace. And we've talked a lot about this. We'll have some more webinars on this coming in the future. But one issue that the group really wanted to focus on is how do we prioritize owner-occupant home buying in today's market? As you know, there's lots of problems with cash buyers coming in and outbidding. There's institutional players, especially these private equity companies that in many markets are swooping in and buying up wholesale, lots of or retail, but buying up lots of houses and that would traditionally be homeowner houses and flipping them to rental. This all combined with housing price challenges and inventory shortages, all of it aggravates the problem. So we're really beginning to think about or doing more thinking about this. And one thing I thought would be worth asking you all is if you've got local programs and initiatives that really prioritize owner occupancy. And if you could email me that information. We are looking for models. We're trying to figure out things that can be done federally, but also maybe we can set up some kind of a toolkit or set of standards that might be used locally or in statewide. We're really looking for ways to try to improve the prospects. And if somebody might remember to put our cash buyer link to our cash buyer brief in the chat box, you can see what kind of all the thinking, and many of you contributed to that. We really need to move beyond that to a lot more specific action steps, and this will be part of that conversation. Similarly, an area that we're working with the Homeownership Council of America, Gabe Del Rio's organization, and the MBA and others, is to develop a client tracking system so that people come to an event, they can sign up, they can sign a digital application or database, whatever it'll look like. And then that would be a tool that could follow through with them through the process. And we hope that it's something that could easily intersect with client management systems. So there's very limited need to add any extra data. that we really need to create, and this has been a kind of a dream of ours for a while, which is going to become more of a reality now, is a digital certificate to say that the housing counseling has been completed on a pre-purchase, and that will capture your agency information, and that all that then gets handed over to the lender at the point when the lender is ready to take application, and the lender adds information as well. And we have kind of a soup to nuts history for what's happened with that particular client, but an ability to step back and figure out what's working and where is it working. So all of that's kind of on the plus side. We will be developing this, I'm sure, in the next few months, and we'll have a lot more information about it. The idea here is that we would like it to be something that intersects easily and in a lot of ways reduces some of the workload that needs to be done. And we hope to use the same kind of data fields everybody else is using, so that it's all it's additive rather than requiring extra work. But there's many advantages to creating a digital basis for how to that counseling has been completed, and we can use this in the long-term relationship that you have with the client and the lender, and that's could be everything from pricing to have value, everything from pricing to documenting the value of your work to if somebody's having trouble with a mortgage, getting referred back to you. So those are the couple of bullet points I wanted to mention to everybody. Plenty more in the hopper, and let me hand it over to Ellie, who's got a few other things you should know about.
Thanks, Bruce, and hi, everybody. I just wanted to give a few updates about the Homeowner Assistance Fund. It came out yesterday that the GSEs are now requiring servicers to suspend foreclosure activities for up to 60 days if the servicer has been notified that a borrower has applied for half. And the links to the bulletins from Fannie and Freddie are here. And also, FHA has not yet updated their policy on this. But if you have stories about FHA borrowers who remained actively in foreclosure after completing a half application, please send them along to Steve Sharp at NCLC. Many of you heard Steve speaking last week during our last Leaders in Housing Counseling webinar, and he talked about this issue. And then also, as of yesterday, Treasury has now posted all approved plans, and you can find them here in this link. The one thing I want to be clear about that's been brought up by a couple of groups who've been looking at the bulletins is that it's pretty clear that this is about when the servicer has been notified. So it isn't just that they applied for half, there has to actually be a notification to the servicer. And there's a little bit of question about exactly what level of notification will be considered verified notification. So just putting that out there. Next slide, please. And I just always want to make sure that everybody knows that our job board is up and running, and you can post jobs there. The link is here. And also you can search for resumes if you're looking for interested housing counselors. And if you are interested in posting your resume, or you know somebody who would be interested in posting their resume, please point them to this site. And with that, I will hand it back to Bruce.
Excellent. And, please, if you're trying to recruit people, use our job board. It's there's a fair amount of activity on it, but there's plenty of room for more. And we are working on recruiting more people to take a look at it who don't have a background in the housing field, well, in housing counseling, but might be interested in a socially driven career. And so this getting a robust participation with the jobs board is a vital link to all that. And of course, about the Housing Action Illinois trainings that are aimed at people just to get to pass the test. And there's other excellent training programs out there as well. Good. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome David Berenbaum. He's Deputy Assistant Secretary at HUD at the Office of Housing Counseling. He's brought his team along, and and a lot of good work, a lot of good momentum is happening here. So we're very interested in hearing what good things are happening, as well as leaving some time for your questions and answers, which will go in the Q&A box, right? Not into the chat. Excellent. David, so glad to see you here. Thank you for doing this.
Bruce, thank you for the invitation, and it's always a pleasure to be here with you, Ellie, and of course, all of the members of the National Housing Resource Center. I have a few just informal remarks to kick off our discussion, but as Ellie noted, and Bruce, as you noted, and Christy, our real joy is having a conversation with you, answering your questions, and as was noted, getting a sense of what's going on right now in the field so that we can be a resource to you. During Q&A, a number of my subject matter experts and colleagues from the Office of Housing Counseling will also be joining in the conversation and responding to your questions. It includes Jerry Mayer, Phyllis Ford, Brian Siebenlist, Ruth Roman, and Terry Carr. And I'll do a quick shout out and invite them to jump into the conversation, depending, in which direction it moves. First, I know right now that you have very extensive demands on your time. And I trust that all of you, one, are taking care of yourselves, watching your health, managing your stress, but also, of course, doing wonderful work that you do every day to work with our clients. But as you move forward, it's very important to ensure that you're working in a safe and a healthy environment. And we at the Office of Housing Counseling want to do everything we can to ensure that you will be able to provide robust services. And as we move back to, quote, normalcy in our marketplace, support you. With that in mind, the Office of Housing Counseling is going to begin once again to actually begin to do program reviews and site visits so that we can provide technical assistance, support, and also help you to navigate the new marketplace that we're working in. HUD staff are returning to both headquarters, the field offices, the regional offices, and it's happening slowly, it's incrementally. I would describe it as a hybrid schedule, but we at the Office of Housing Counseling want to be there to support you. So it's possible you may get a call from your point of contact. It's possible if you call us to say, can we come speak an event? Can we provide on-site information? Let us know, because we want to be there to support you as in fact we're returning to hopefully a healthier and more normal business marketplace. Now that unfortunately does not address caseload, because we know in eviction, we know also in foreclosure, the numbers are trending in the wrong direction. While the numbers have not reached where they thought they would be, we are at a moment in time where we're watching carefully what is happening in all of the marketplace. We know from 9902 data that you are doing amazing work in the area of sustaining apartment tenancies, working to prevent evictions, and connecting consumers to assistance that is available to them. We haven't seen the same ramp up yet in some of the foreclosure prevention programs, but to some extent, that's because many of the servicers are doing an effective job in offering consumers mods and forbearances. And we'll speak about the FHA program and some of our efforts more in depth today. Last week, I hope I reached all of you, went out to over 1,600 housing counseling managers, housing counselors, staff people. Some of the steps that we are taking in collaboration with FHA, in particular, our outreach effort, what we're calling our RightParty contact letter. The letter was shared with NHRC. It has been shared openly with other trade associations as well. And there are two letters, one which was already mailed on the 4th of April, and another which will be mailed on the 11th. The first letter will be going out to reverse mortgage holders who are more than 60 days in default on their loan. Of course, with the HECM product, That could be a tax or insurance situation or some other related escrow type of issue. We're sending a letter to those individuals. It's approximately 15,000 households that, in fact, have not responded to their mortgage servicer. And we are sending the letter in both English and Spanish, and we are urging that they contact their housing counseling agency of choice. The letter on the 11th will be going out to over 400,000 forward-facing traditional FHA mortgagors who are 60 or more days behind on their mortgage payment. This is modeled on the letter that we sent last summer to individuals who had not taken advantage of the COVID forbearance that had tremendous impact. Once again, the letter is going out in English and Spanish, and we are urging consumers to reach out to their servicer or their housing counseling agency of choice. We shared something with a little bit of advance notice with you, and this is something that I've been speaking about in past leaders in housing counseling meetings. One of our priorities at the Office of Housing Counseling is to take a fresh look and to modernize our approach and our systems. Many of you are aware that the agency Locator tool on HUD.gov was originally created, I believe it was in 1997, and has not been updated since then. It is terribly out of date. It uses old technology. It did not identify all of the available choices for housing counseling on a national or a multi-state level. We are currently in soft launch of a new tool. And it's a wonderful new tool because it really responds with greater depth to a consumer's area of interest with regard to type of counseling, with regard to agencies that are located nearby them, and also affords the opportunity to reach out to national and multi-state providers if that is their choice. We are also preparing to announce additional updates to other systems. For example, our telephonic system, as well as finding this information on smartphones via a specially designed browser using the agency Locator tool. Those public announcements will be occurring in about 2 weeks, but we're very excited about these announcements because we know thousands of consumers every day turn to these tools. And it's critically important that they be fast, responsive, and helpful for a consumer so that they can reach out to you via telephone, via web, or any other means that you have identified to HUD for this information. Now, in addition, the letters will have this information. So it's our hope that consumers who are struggling with their mortgage payment will quickly turn to this link and call you, because we think that will be one of the best tools, one of the best choices they could make if they're concerned about reaching out to their mortgage servicer or if they're worried and unsure. Of course, all of you are trusted advisors in this space. I'll share with you that we've also suggested to FHFA that this letter, a very simple device using first-class mail under the signature of the Office of Housing Counseling, we believe is a best practice that could easily be emulated by Fannie and Freddie. And so as a best practice, we're suggesting that to FHFA, and we hope we'll have your support in moving forward in that way. We commend the GSEs for working directly with the housing counseling community, as well as any number of servicers, but we should be using every tool in our toolbox to reach consumers who are at risk right now. And I hope with this mailing going out, as I said, to over 400,000 at-risk FHA borrowers, that we will have a profound impact. Once again, I want to remind you also that we have some marvelous ad slicks that can be used for social media or, in fact, donated space in local newspapers and the like in multiple languages. They're all posted on the HUD Exchange and available for use, and I hope that you'll take advantage of it. Switching gears slightly, I'm also really excited that we have an upcoming meeting of the Housing Counseling Federal Advisory Committee. It will occur on the 19th of April, and we have a very robust agenda. We're going to be doing an update and discussing current efforts with regard to sustainable housing efforts, and we'll have presentations from a number of different vantage points and allow for a really constructive dialogue and recommendations from our committee members. We'll have a summary of some of the work that our agencies and the Office of Housing Counseling have been doing with regard to disaster relief across the country, and invite feedback and thoughts on how we can be more proactive and how we can look at our grants program to do even more impactful work moving forward. And then something I've spoken to Bruce about, and I'll be speaking to, frankly, all of our stakeholders about, is an important discussion seeking guidance from all of our stakeholders, but in this case, our committee members, on how we deliver HUD housing counseling services. This relates to the topic or the discussion that many of you have been asking about us, with regard to how we deliver services. We've moved from essentially 50 years ago when everything was in mortar and brick place-based counseling, to today a real mix of services using telephonic, place-based one-on-one counseling, virtual counseling, and HUD has not updated its rule in quite a while, years. And so now we're approaching a time where we're going to invite active discussion and begin to think about updating our rules in this space to reflect the practice of housing counseling today. In my ideal world, each agency will deliver counseling in a means that is true to its mission, true to its commitment to community and the consumers you serve, and at the same time will also facilitate consumers selecting the training and also the group and individual counseling methodologies that are most appropriate for their needs. And so we're going to begin a discussion on this important issue and seek the guidance of the members of our advisory committee, but also all of you, both as NHRC, the Coalition of Intermediaries, all of our stakeholders, whether you be an intermediary, a state HFA, or a local housing counseling organization. So we hope that you can join us for these meetings. If you'd like as well, there's an open mic towards the end of the program where the public is invited to make statements. We invite you to participate in that way as well. Many of you may be policy wonk like me, but if you haven't seen it already, HUD's strategic plan and priorities was recently posted to HUD.gov. And many of NHRC's and the housing counseling community's priorities are included in the document. Of course, it's a very comprehensive document looking at all of the areas of focus for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But the HUD strategic plan, of course, is looking at reaching underserved market segments, populations, communities, bridging the home ownership gap, and housing counseling as part of HUD's strategic plan and action plan is extremely well represented. And I invite you to take a look at the document and to engage with us on the document itself. I want to do a shout out and a thank you to the over 300 housing counseling agencies that responded to our invitation to participate in our office's racial equity survey. We are focused and committed to expanding culturally sensitive, linguistically appropriate, and services that reach market segments that have not realized homeownership or we are not adequately reaching in the housing counseling program. The survey had a wonderful response. Over 1,000 organizations received it. As I said, 300 completed it. And the best practices and the responses are going to be very formative as we look at future NOFOs, as well as tailor programs to help you deliver services on a community level. We're very focused on, in fact, realizing Secretary Fudge's and the administration's priorities with regard to homeownership. And to Christie's summary early, I just want to highlight one aspect of the report that she shared. Again, this is the White House proposal, but I'm very excited that in that proposal, that in fact, pre-purchase counseling would be included in some of the new programs that have been proposed. You're probably familiar with these programs, the generational mortgage program at $100 million, as well as the HEAL mortgage program at $15 million. Both of those programs, as proposed, would include pre-purchase housing counseling and the needs also to compensate for those services. So again, this is all pending. This is simply a proposal, but it is very exciting to see these components of the budget included. I also want to share with you that the Office of Housing Counseling has reached out to NeighborWorks America. We have regular conversations with all of our stakeholders, But in particular, in discussions with you, in discussions with other stakeholders, we recognize that it has been quite a while since the national industry standards and related best practices, NCHEC, have been updated. And we are practicing and we are providing services in a whole new environment today. It's not only how we can tap into some of the efficiencies of reporting and technology to streamline all of our work together, but also subject matters have changed. How mortgages originated have changed. The issue of appraisal and valuation and discrimination in the marketplace. Issues of foreclosure prevention. The last time the documents were updated was during the financial crisis. So the time is right for an update. And I'm very excited that NeighborWorks is equally interested in updating these standards. And we're going to have a few exploratory conversations. And I look forward to these conversations being broadened to all stakeholders. And that's frankly the way NCHEC was developed years ago. And I think the time is right once again to take a fresh look at that. So looking forward to partnering with NeighborWorks and all of you in that space. I also want to share with you something that I'm very excited about. Many of you over the years have spoken about the need for a national public awareness campaign. Planning for such a campaign began a year ago in the Office of Housing Counseling, and I'm happy to report to you that we are moving forward with what I hope will be a tremendous opportunity to develop a campaign that will educate the general public to the benefits of working with a HUD-approved housing counseling agency and a HUD-certified housing counselor. We are going through a procurement process, which is moving forward very nicely at HUD. And it's my hope by later this summer or early this fall, perhaps in time for our annual virtual conference in August, we'll be ready to begin to seriously engage with you and other partner stakeholders to develop what I hope will be a high impact campaign that will really educate the public to the benefits of working with each of you. Stay tuned, more will be coming on that front. I know many of you may have questions about our current appropriation, the joint explanatory statement. As we're moving forward with these programs, we really hope to develop programs based on your recommendations, but also develop programs that will leverage the impact of the work that you do. I'm particularly focused with my team on pre-purchase counseling. We heard Bruce speak earlier to some of the wonderful programs that are being developed in the private sector to expand homeownership for a diverse group of people. To realize that, we need to see a tremendous growth in capacity and engagement with HUD-approved housing counseling organizations. And that includes both public and private sector support. With that in mind, we have actively begun discussions with the CFPB to look at the impact of current RESPA requirements with regard to the no action letter, because there may be other approaches that would streamline and effectively broaden the ability of responsible lenders, mortgage originators, to contract and also do a fee-for-service relationship with housing counseling agencies. We want to see if we can remove some of the potential roadblocks in this space. And I'm happy to say that those discussions have been productive to date and will be continuing. The no action letter has prompted a lot of discussion, not only with regard to its requirement and compliance concerns by some lenders, but also with regard to how do we scale up? What's an appropriate fee for service? How can we expand the impact of pre-purchase counseling? And while we're extremely active looking at the public sector role in this space, we also believe that through example and working collaboratively with our partners at CFPB and in the lending industry and each of you, that we can find a solution to some of these challenges to allow you to scale up. I want to close before we go to Q&A by also speak to what I think is a very significant opportunity. We are very focused in expanding access to a host of federal funded programs for the housing counseling community. On May 10th and the 11th, we are sponsoring a program called Serving Communities Through Housing Counseling. This conference is being sponsored jointly with other organizations, other offices at HUD, Community Planning and Development, for example. And we're going to be bringing in some actual examples where the counseling community has effectively worked on a state and a local level with entitlement communities. And we'll be using a host of program examples, and I hope that they'll serve as starting points for discussions with all of the entitlement communities. I believe as of this moment in time that we have over 600 registrants, including a wide representation from state and localities to attend the program as well. So if you've not registered yet, I invite you to do so. And Jerry, during the course of our conversation, will speak to some of our other upcoming trainings. So Bruce, I think I've been rambling for a while now. I'll turn it back to you and we can dive into the important aspect of the meeting, our question, answer, and discussion.
Excellent. And no, very helpful. I think people are very interested in. Let me first have Ellie ask the first question, and it's relevant to what you've been talking about the broader aspects of housing counseling in the federal government. Ellie.
Great, thanks, David, for all that really great information. So one of the things that we're wondering about here at NHRC is how exactly housing counseling is going to be integrated into all the new programs that the president is proposing in his budget for HUD, so the down payment assistance and home ownership programs like that.
Yeah. First, I'm really happy to share, Ellie, in response to your question with everyone, that the Office of Housing Counseling has really been a partner with all of the offices at HUD with regard to the importance and the role of housing counseling. One of my priorities a year ago, when I joined HUD, was to really knock on everyone's door at HUD to really get a sense of how historically housing counseling has been perceived, but more significantly, how we could partner with various programs. And particularly with single family housing and FHA, we have been having robust conversations about expanding the role of housing counseling. Of course, FHA is a distinct animal within HUD with a host of statutory requirements. There's a whole nother level of oversight. And of course, the Mortgage Insurance Fund is a unique animal in how that it is overseen with oversight. But relative to that, we are in active conversations about trying new demonstrations across our program, including FHA. But we're also looking at other offices, whether it be multifamily housing, whether it be working in tribal communities. We're looking at even our rules to streamline them, for example, particularly with regard to tribal communities, to expand the footprint of counseling, who provides counseling, and how those groups are funded by other offices such as ONAP to receive funds. I have to say, when it comes to CPD, they have been completely on board, and they are working diligently with us to try to communicate to entitlement communities the importance of housing counseling. Of course, I think everyone is aware of CFPB as a partner agency is very much committed to the importance of housing counseling. But we also have been engaged speaking with Treasury and others because we want to see counseling utilized and included in state, for example, half fund activities and other related activities to prevent foreclosure in particular. So we're doing our best to stay involved. We're also working on some exciting demonstrations, for example, under FLEC, and Terry Carr can speak more to that, trying to emulate demonstrations that some of the private sector groups are doing in cooperation with other agencies, federal agencies, to really foster home ownership in target communities. So I would say the dialogue has been extremely positive. Build Back Better was certainly an opportunity for some intense conversation about how housing counseling could be applied. But as you noted, that did not pass Congress. So now we're looking at the president's budget and we will see how we can proceed.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So another question, which is, there's been a lot of talk about, and a positive talk about how Fannie Mae has electronically set up a program to capture more of people's rental payments as a way of having a fuller sense of what people's real credit profiles are. And And this kind of does point to a big gap that exists in underwriting, and especially the move towards electronic underwriting. And the gaps are really places where, in fact, you are people who aren't involved as much in the cash economy, or they may not be using their bank account to pay bills, or it's documenting their income, a variety of things like that. And what's, I think, an opportunity that we're actually seeing develop much is that housing counseling agencies would be a logical place to figure out for those people who a better way of documenting rental payments or income documentation or other gaps that exist in sort of the digital world here. Is there thinking about HUD, about how to position counseling to be in that place to give a deeper, fuller perspective, especially on low and moderate income home buyers?
So Bruce, I may surprise everyone, but I hope that the HUD Office of Housing Counseling will be a leader, a center for ideas in housing counseling, along with NHRC and all of our other partners. We're not simply a regulator, not simply a funder. We want to be a think tank for seeing the development of innovative approaches in housing counseling. It's one of the reasons I'm particularly proud of my team and all of the agencies who are working on our new HBCU and MSI initiative. You know, we're touching over 40 college campuses and surrounding communities through that wonderful new idea. But we're not going to stop there. To your particular question, you know, I think about the work of the Credit Builders Alliance, and I'm sure most on the call are probably familiar with their work. They've been looking at examples of new forms of credit reporting, particularly with regard to rental payment, different forms of models with different providers in the marketplace. Much to my surprise, they are not working with the housing counseling community. And I think that's an absence. I think we have a critical role to play there. And in fact, in the coming weeks, I'll be meeting with Talia Khan-Kravis and other members of the Credit Builders Alliance. And my exact thought was to put them in contact with NHRC and, in fact, some of our intermediaries and the Intermediary Coalition, because this is a space we should be working. Alternative forms of credit to realize home ownership, particularly for underserved groups or groups who do not have credit whatsoever, is critically important. And the models also allow for choice, so that if someone, most of the studies to date in this space have shown that these alternative credit models expand access to credit and home ownership. But in the few cases where there may be a counter situation where someone's credit score drops, it's optional if that information be captured, depending on the model being used. So Bruce, I think you're raising a terrific point there. And I think it's a significant opportunity for the counseling community to partner with the folks who historically have been working in that space.
Good. Okay. And I think institutions doing the underwriting can also pick up the slack here a little bit too, but that's good. Ellie, you could have the next question.
Okay, did you want me to go to the questions that are coming up in
No. I mean, this is the FHA question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so you heard me talk about earlier about the FHA issue with folks who are applying for HAF. That right now the FHA guidance is that the application has to be approved before there's any halt to the foreclosure. Can you talk at all about the possibility of that changing going forward?
Well, to be candid, Ellie, no, I can't speak to that, but I do want to respond to the question. And to the group, I mean, to everyone, I think everyone has to understand that the Office of Housing Counseling, while we work collaboratively with the Office of Single Family Housing and the FHA, particularly as I've noted on outreach and related counseling engagement issues where we've had tremendous impact. The fact of the matter is that FHA's policy and everything related to underwriting or loss mitigation is outside of the Office of Housing Counseling authority and responsibilities. Despite that, I think that I would expect that this is an area that, of course, everyone is focused on. But I do want to really note that the FHA portfolio as a whole has been very responsive and, quite frankly, often case leading the loss mitigation best practice response in this space. Whether it was the adoption of brand new loss mitigation tools to allow more consumer choice, including the advanced loan modification, which substantially allowed a 25% reduction in mortgage payments, whether it's the brand new proposal by regulation that's just proposed to allow for a 40-year modification in the FHA program. Again, that has to be done through rulemaking. FHA has taken extremely substantial steps to try to protect borrower interests. I'll also note that if we look at the numbers, that in fact over 1 million struggling homeowners in the FHA program received partial claim options, and over 400,000 with FHA insured mortgages have already been able to cure defaults through modifications. So servicers are being very proactive. More specifically to the counseling agencies, there's nothing currently in FHA rules that precludes a mortgage servicer. If you call them up and say you have a consumer who's applied in New York State, for example, for a half request, and of course we know New York has issues right now with processing those requests, it's only responsible for a servicer to agree while that's pending to stay any form of foreclosure activity. The same is true for any situation where a foreclosure is pending and a counseling agency or even a consumer feels they will be qualified for half. There's nothing that prevents a servicer from granting an extension. That said, any comment with regard to what Fannie or Freddie has done or how FHA will respond is beyond my area of scope and responsibilities, and I would have to defer to FHA to respond to that question.
Okay, so let's go to the Q&A, and Ellie, Ebony, whoever's handling all this.
Okay. Let's see. We have quite a few questions. Okay, so now that that half is here, and to make sure that every homeowner knows, because some don't, will HUD be doing any social media outreach or TV or radio, anything to kind of get the word out?
Well, first, if you've seen the letter we sent out to all of the FHA consumers who are behind, it speaks to the HAF program and how to apply for it. So we are marketing it. And I feel, in fact, writing directly to an at-risk borrower is the best way to inform them of it. Social media, HUD has been very active on social media, both its own boards as well as providing resources to the housing counseling community. And I think that's very, very important. I'll share with you that from our recent survey with regard to racial equity in housing that, again, 300 groups responded to, what was quite compelling was that overwhelmingly the housing counseling organizations that responded, while they appreciated social media and while they appreciated PSAs and the like, their response was, what was the number one way to educate the public about activities? Word of mouth. So really it gets to the grassroots efforts of all of you, all of us, to get the word out there into a community. HUD is also trying for earned media, but our role is distinct because I have to remind everyone, this is a Treasury program. We're trying to drive consumers to it, but the responsibility of working through the program, working with the state housing finance agencies lies with Treasury. And we at HUD are doing everything we can to educate the public. Our counseling community, as you know, we had an over 2.5-hour training program. We're actually planning on doing an update to that program at counseling community request. Many of you said you have a lot of question and answers about HAF that are not being answered directly. So we are planning what I'll call a Q&A session with CFPB and Treasury to respond to all of your questions in this space, because we want every eligible consumer to tap into those funds, despite some of the problems of rollout across the country. Ellie, I can't hear you.
Yes, there are a couple people who are asking about when the handbook update is going to come out.
I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record to everyone, and I apologize, but the handbook is in clearance. And I wish I could say next week. As far as the Office of Housing Counseling is concerned, we have completed our task, but it's going through review from the Office of General Counsel and others. And we are looking forward to releasing that handbook as soon as possible.
Okay, is there any plan from HUD or FHA to address the issue of private equity in the housing market and how so many people are getting pushed out of the market?
So I can respond to that a different way, and that is Secretary Fudge of leadership and HUD are extremely concerned about the shortage of affordable housing. And within the area, the scope of HUD's authority and budget are speaking about new programs to ensure the availability of affordable rental, as well as affordable home ownership opportunities. Many of those are related to the budget, which as HUD professional staff, I can't speak to the budget publicly. However, I would say it's certainly something that I hope NHRC and its members will look at closely. But there's no question that HUD leadership is committed to this issue and is looking at ways to provide more affordable rental as well as home ownership units.
Okay. Will there ever be a day when home purchase counseling will be advocated by lenders when they talk to their clients and endorsed by HUD to really strongly encourage all lenders to have their clients use a housing counselor to the point where the lender will offer some compensation for the counseling completed?
So back to our priorities for this fiscal year. I'm actually very excited that we are planning what I'm calling a pre-purchase or home ownership research symposium on the topic of home ownership counseling by HUD approved organizations. We are going to co-sponsor this program with HUD's Office of PD&R, our research branch, Policy Development and Research, as well as we're in discussion with other key stakeholders in the space to also be part of this program, where we hope to speak to data, both existing and new, release data potentially, talk about best practices, current initiatives that are being actually provided, ones that are being worked upon. We hope to have the CFPB be part of the conversation. And I am committed to seeing growth in this space. It is critically important that we move the housing counseling community from what I will call the ups and downs of funding, particularly for public funding, to a more even-keeled approach that it has significant private sector support through multiple means. It could be private foundation, it could be fee for service, it could be consumer clubs. There's so many different models, including innovative approaches as well for public funding. That also means more diversified public funding, because I think, for example, counseling could be of great benefits to members of the armed forces and their families. And I would love to see other divisions of the federal government, such as the VA or other offices in this space, play a role as well. So this is an area we're going to be focusing on in the coming months. It also addresses the importance of going to scale from removing some of the speed bumps that may be in the way. And I do believe that having every single lender in the nation under RESPA have to request a no action letter from the CFPB potentially has a chilling impact on our going to scale in this space, particularly in light of the commitment that we're seeing more broadly to racial equity and home ownership across the nation right now. So we're going to be working on that with you and continuing to speak very publicly about the importance of housing counseling. And I'll also add that when we do begin our national campaign, that racial equity and bridging the home ownership gap will be a critical component of it. And we hope to have industry partnership and potentially even ad counsel if we're successful in doing this.
Do you think, this is not a question from anybody, this is a question from Ellie.
Okay.
Do you think that there's any chance ever that FHA will require housing counseling be used, particularly for first-time home buyers that are accessing the FHA mortgage?
So Ellie, I'm speaking for David now, my opinion, this is not HUD. I don't believe that you will ever see a requirement across a single provider, whether it be Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA, that housing counseling is completely required for a mortgage. What I do believe we'll see, as appropriate, will be distinct mortgage products to reach target populations where housing counseling will be required or incentivized. And I think actually, I hope that more consumers will voluntarily also opt in regardless of mortgage product. But I think that's an area for ongoing discussion. And I'd like you to ask that question again at our research symposium, which I hope will take place in May. We're trying to tie it with some other announcements.
Okay, great. So has HUD looked at any alternative or affordable housing, such as boxable units that are low cost, compact, easily transported, and quick to set up? These types of construction can be used both in rural areas and in cities.
If it's okay, if we could bring Jerry online. Jerry is working actually on a very interesting program that I wouldn't describe as boxable. I think that's very intriguing with small home discussions and other discussions going on. But we are looking at modular and other approaches. Jerry, are you out there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, David. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. HUD has an Office of Manufactured Housing that we are working closely with to provide training for housing counselors and how to discuss modular and manufactured housing programs with consumers. These are great affordable options, and also figuring out how to do the financing around that, especially with an FHA insured mortgage, is something we want counselors to know more about. It is a growing segment of the affordable housing market, and it really fits in with the administration's goals of serving low to moderate income borrowers with great affordable housing options, and manufactured housing of various sizes and technologies is something that we want housing counselors to know a lot more about.
Okay. Let's see, you spoke about alternative credit advances, but I'm curious about any advancement algorithms used.
Yeah, I am not going to represent that I am a subject matter expert at that level. What I would suggest, though, is if you visit the Credit Builders Alliance website, they have links to a number of studies that have been done that are really robust with the information that are included. And that may be a good starting point to get a better sense of that.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand this question, so I will ask it. But Bridget asked, are there any discussions as to a direct liaison for housing counselors to have a direct contact for updates? I'm assuming she's referring to at the HUD Office of Housing Counseling.
So first, anything we can do to increase how we're available or how we communicate with you is something we want to do. I'll share with you that we have over, I believe Jerry, it's over 16,000, maybe even more than that, folks on our GovServe listserv that we use to send out updates to the counseling community. We have been doing an unprecedented number of webinars. And I would call those webinars an effort on continuing education or pertinent updates. And not that continuation is required, but our goal has been to keep everyone informed to the latest developments in all the spaces that we are working in, so that you have facts at your fingertips or on demand on the website to view at your leisure. We also have been looking at changing the Bridge newsletter. Instead of being more of a quarterly, what I'll describe as a dated newsletter, even though it's robust information in it, to be more of a periodic electronic blast to all of you so that we can celebrate your work and do it much more informally in a way that you more easily use. Moving last year to the virtual housing conference for everyone, for all agencies, state housing finance agencies, local housing council groups, and intermediaries. was a tremendous success in using tools that allowed interactivity, which we'll repeat again this year. We are trying to do all that we can to be transparent, but let me also say that my team and I are also ready and available. If you'd like us to attend a meeting regionally, if you'd like us to speak virtually, just to your housing counselors to say thank you. If you have recommendations, shoot them my way and I'm happy to schedule a meeting. We want to be accessible to you. This is an opportunity for us to really think out of the box as we move forward. I want to speak to reporting because I know that's a critical issue. And of course, Ellie and Bruce have shared periodically with us, and I know from my years in the housing counseling community that reporting can be perceived as burdensome. I understand that. Now, we're looking as we advocate for new technologies in the Office of Housing Counseling, as we work collaboratively with NeighborWorks to avoid redundancy in reporting, before the recent funding was launched. And also as we look at emerging systems that NHRC is part of the development with you on, or as we're looking at internally at HUD to update our technologies, our hope is to streamline these systems so that there will be simpler reporting and you will feel that you won't feel pain in reporting to the Office of Housing Counseling. It takes time to get there, but we are focused on this. I also want to share with you that we are very committed as well to better capture of data. I'm sure you have heard it. I hear it time and time again that we do not have adequate data to show the impact of housing counseling in any number of fields, particularly pre-purchase though. So as we move forward to new technology platforms, we want to capture data in new and innovative ways to show your impact as organizations. The value proposition that you bring to housing counseling is critical. You are best in class as HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. I speak with pride when I talk about the role and the impact of housing counseling agencies when conversations about financial education, financial empowerment, and other forms of discussions are going on. We know our standards are tough, but we also know we can simplify reporting moving forward so that ultimately it becomes less burdensome to you. And we're committed to doing that. And as we talk about modernizing some of our rules and regulation approaches, we're hopeful that we also will have internal funding to update some of our systems in the near future.
Okay, so I asked this question and you answered, but somebody phrased it in a little bit different way, so I'm gonna just kind of throw it back in the way that they phrased it. But is there a reason why housing counseling can't be mandatory like HECM? I don't know if there's anything more you want to say.
I think, first of all, in HECM, I think it is a best practice, housing counseling, and it's quite understandable with some of the challenges surrounding reverse mortgage products, how critical and how important the role of housing counseling is to be sure an elder understands the mortgage product and all of its impact. I also would argue that housing counseling, if we were to take a fresh look at the HECM program, could ideally even be more in-depth today. Because it's a very complex marketplace, and often individuals thinking about a reverse mortgage don't understand all the impact of the reverse mortgage. We have to be sure that people understand the product and its impact across their finances and estate planning. But back to the general marketplace, I applaud the use of housing counseling in pre-purchase. Let me also add, I am going to be a strong proponent for post-origination counseling moving forward. Not simply getting a homeowner to that settlement table, but also for us to be with that consumer over the life of the loan. Ideally, checking in with the consumer at some point, whether it's 6 months or 12 months after origination, and seeing that ideally as part of the funding model for pre-purchase counseling moving forward. So I'm a big believer in pre-purchase. I just don't believe that we will see a wholesale requirement for housing counseling across an entire marketplace.
Okay, and speaking of HECM, Buzz Zeman wants to tell you Novad has been non-responsive to seniors and counselors and that he's thrilled that there's a new contractor. Can we expect the system to be responsive?
FHA is focused on that issue. And again, while we are not part of FHA, I will share with you that I've been part of conversations where there are very high expectations of the new provider. So my hope is yes.
And I should let you know that people are applauding the post-purchase discussion that you just had. Very happy to hear it. Okay. Somebody else commenting about requiring housing counseling. All right, so a HECM issue often related to Novad has been long delays up to a year when borrowers or heirs are trying to turn over the keys. Not a question, that's just a comment that was made.
Yeah, so I want to share something that I shared during one of our webinars, that the Office of Housing Counseling has had in-depth conversations with FHA and the Office of Single Family Housing. If a counseling agency is having difficulty with regard to any issue with regard to an FHA loan, whether it be an issue with origination, servicing, any issue, please contact the FHA Resource Center and identify yourself as calling from a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. We are looking into really monitoring the work you're doing and also ensuring that those requests are escalated and addressed with appropriate follow-up to you. I know many of you turn to the CFPB complaint mechanism. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But as well, FHA is committed to resolving concerns brought to us by our partners in the counseling community. So I just want to reemphasize that.
Okay, so that's all of the questions that have been submitted, but I did want to ask a question about second employment beyond housing counseling. It kind of popped up in one of the Facebook groups, so I thought I'd give you all the opportunity to talk about it here. And that's related to if somebody wants to do a job as a financial counselor, maybe not as a HUD certified counselor, but maybe working for a credit union and doing that kind of work on the side with a credit union. So y'all have been on here before and did a great job of answering kind of the whole contractor versus, part-time and full-time employed. But this other question has popped up. So I thought I'd give you the chance to talk about that.
Sure. So I'm going to invite Jerry to respond to that question, but I'll just queue up his response because I think this is an important issue and one that we're looking at from several different vantage points. I think it's not a surprise if I would share with you that many individuals who have passed the HUD certification exam and are HUD approved housing counselors, many have chosen to change jobs and they are no longer working in the housing counseling community. But not surprisingly, they continue to work in other areas such as real estate or housing finance. And what we have learned in a number of situations is that several of those, I'll say professionals, continue to market themselves as a HUD certified housing counselor. Now, ethically, it's problematic, but also under our standards, it's also inappropriate. And so our office has been sending out warning letters through the Office of General Counsel to individuals who do that, because as we all know, the only HUD approved housing counselor must be employed by a HUD approved agency. Now, the question that's being asked here also deals with potential conflict of interest, right? I mean, that's really the issue for any agency or manager to be concerned about. So Jerry, let me invite you to jump in there.
Thank you, David. And I really do appreciate this question because I think it's worthy of good discussion. We all know that HUD certified housing counselors must be employees of the agencies where they are doing counseling. And also folks who are working at more than one agency or working at different kinds of employers and a housing counseling agency, and they really should have a reasonable and a plausible workload. And this is something that we look at. Now, the issue of working for a for-profit entity and working for a nonprofit HUD participating housing counseling agency naturally raises concerns around potentially the independence and the objectivity of housing counseling, and especially around identity of interest and the appearance of an identity of interest issue. And what we do really strongly advise all agencies to avoid is even the appearance of that conflict of interest. And at a minimum, agency disclosures might need to be revised to account for any relationships with for-profit entities that could arise from such a relationship, and also pay attention to perceptions of potential steering that could also arise in the minds of consumers. The agency's quality control plan may need updating, which is something that should be considered. And also in terms of our monitoring process, we look at the resumes of housing counselors and their caseload, and this could become an issue during a HUD performance review. Now, this is not a prohibited practice, what I'm describing here, but it is certainly something that we would put a caution flag out for any agency to really pay attention to some of these issues on.
Thanks, Jerry.
And I will, I'll ask you both. I know you've spoken about this on a previous webinar, but somebody is asking again about what are the rules around working for more than one HUD approved organization as a certified counselor?
Sure. And essentially, very simply put, there is no prohibition. You can work for 2 agencies on a part-time basis. What we will be looking at is to ensure that the workload by the agency and by that individual is real. And that, so there is no prohibition, and it's, if someone is working for part-time for 1 or more, that's okay. It's just got to be realistic in workload and how it's being reported.
Well, and so with that, you segued beautifully to the next question, which is, what is a reasonable workload?
That is going to vary from agency to agency. For those of you, for example, in pre-purchase counseling, you know that there are so many different flavors or approaches to pre-purchase counseling. There are some groups that can do a pre-purchase session on a telephone in 90 minutes. There are others that will spend, I'll say it candidly, weeks or more qualifying that consumer for a mortgage. Either one can be correct depending on the nature of the counseling being provided and the consumer needs and so on. So workload is going to vary. Our preference, and Phyllis, I'm going to invite you in on this conversation. Our preference is to look at what is appropriate for the agency itself. Phyllis, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, you may. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. Well, that's the question that I usually push back to the agency, because we're looking at your work plan. We're looking at the number of people that you're processing in terms of counseling. We have to be sure that you're sure that what is being done is a fair and appropriate workload. That's how we would analyze that. Just how many people are being counseled, how long is the counseling, how many people in your work plan do you expect to counsel? And that's the way we look at it. So I do have to push back a little bit and look to the agency to give some direction about whether or not it is a sufficient workload or applicable workload.
Right. So just stepping that push back a little bit further, I invite agencies that are trying to figure this out to reach out to their point of contact and request a discussion to ensure that they're approaching it in a way that we're all comfortable with. But again, we're not going to dictate what is an appropriate volume. Some agencies, for example, have staff dedicated to intake, others do not. That all impacts on volume and the amount of time spent with client. So we really would like each agency to develop its own best practice.
Okay. So back to the kind of alternative housing, manufactured housing question. How would you address the concern about exploring manufactured housing to provide affordable housing to traditionally under-resourced communities in light of the recent issues with the appraisal issues in communities of color? Wouldn't that just increase the gap in home values for BIPOC communities?
Wow, that's really 2 different questions in one. First, We're looking forward later this year to really having an in-depth program on the affordable housing opportunities of manufactured housing. It's really interesting because manufactured housing, particularly in many more rural communities, but now in a growing sense in also areas where there's an absence of affordable housing, including some urban and suburban communities, is actively being considered as an option. And that's a positive. I'm very proud of the work that HUD has done with regard to PAVE. HUD, of course, was in a leadership position with regard to working on an interagency basis. The recommendations and action items included in valuation and appraisal discrimination actively include a role for the housing counseling community. And I just want to briefly note the important role that, one, we have an updating best practices again, NCHEC, to cover this space, but two, as well, this is an area that you can expect to see on future certification exams now, because this is a critical issue facing our communities as far as a fair lending issue. And then last, moving forward, we need to be in a position to educate our consumers to what to do if they encounter any form of appraisal or valuation discrimination, perceived or real, to address it. And so we're going to begin to focus in on that issue to offer more comprehensive trainings as we move forward as well. And we'll be doing that in conjunction with HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. HUD is going to be a leader in this space, and I urge everyone to review the action items from PAVE if you've not already done that. I think the points that are being made about valuation, fair lending issues, and appraisal are real. I don't think we have adequate time to parse the issue of the type of housing versus valuation. For me, truthfully, and from my experience in the space in the past, working in the private sector at agencies, often it is more an issue of community redlining than necessarily an issue of undervaluation. Though there are certainly examples of direct undervaluation based on race of homeowner and other issues. But I think that involves a much more in-depth conversation than we have for time here.
Thanks. And I'll add, we did a session with the group whose name is escaping me all of a sudden. But if you look in our history of our webinars, we do have a webinar with a group that does really great work with manufactured housing. And I'll just say, manufactured housing is no longer the trailer that your grandmother had. So there's been a lot of upgrades and improvements in the type of housing that is available with manufactured housing. And so with that, that really is the last of the questions. So I don't know if there's any final things that David, you or any of your team want to add.
I'm just going to do a quick shout out to Ruth and Terry, if I could. I know I'll be asked if there's anything briefly they would like to add to the conversation.
No, not right now, David. Thanks.
Okay. And Terry, anything with regard to our demonstrations working on an interagency basis?
I don't know if Terry is on.
Okay, we may have lost Terry. All right, well then I'll simply say thank you to everyone because, and once again, I want to invite you to simply drop me a note to my email, david.l.berenbaum@hud.gov, or reach out to me. I'm always available for a discussion. It's my joy engaging with our housing counseling community. And I want to assure you that when we have these meetings, we're actively listening. And I hope that you're seeing some subtle changes in our NOFOs, how we're also approaching new ideas, how we're looking to modernize the office. And I look forward to your active discussions with regard to the delivery of housing counseling services, as well as how we approach tribal communities in rulemaking in the near future. So thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you all. We relish our partnership working with you.
And
Well,
Bruce,
thank
there is one question specifically for you.
All right.
Would the digital tracking work be similar to Hope Loan Port? Both sides would be able to track the progress of the clients, and would it sync with the different CMS systems?
Well, yes and no. It would not be similar to Hope Loan Port, but both sides would absolutely be able to both put information in and take information out. It'll be limited to the stakeholders because of all the privacy things. And the idea will be that rather than it be a static place where things go, that it be a little more dynamic so that different stakeholders at different times can make contributions to it. So it's a little bit more ongoing. It'll follow the case through from beginning to end. And hopefully it's a little bit simpler to use at the end of the day for all the parties involved. It's doing something different, but hopefully it'll be easier for you all to use. And there'll be plenty more that comes on it in soon enough. I'll just do one other quick shout out for HUD, which is Ellie just pointed out to me the new interface for the HUD Housing Counseling Locator. And it is much more part of the 21st century, much quicker and much, much easier to use for locating a housing counselor. And so that just seems like a big leap forward. If anybody can put it in the chat so you can take a look at it. This is a tool that we use a lot, but hopefully clients can use, and it's always been a little difficult, and this I think makes it a lot easier. So with that, we're going to close out the call, and so on just supporting housing counseling and advocacy and joining NHRC and renewing. We've done just fine this year. We really appreciate everybody jumping back in. I would just say that there is a group of agencies that haven't renewed in the past couple of years. And so an email has gone out to them saying you haven't renewed in the past couple of years. And we don't want you to go, but if you don't in the next 60 days, we will actually pull the plug, which means no longer getting a discount on the CoreLogic, Credico credit reports, no longer getting the emails about funding opportunities, and no longer having access to the paid part of the Savvy online student loan service. And there's some other benefits that are coming shortly that will be beneficial to counseling agencies that will be able to roll out over the course of the year. So, generally when we tell people that, sometimes they say, gee, I had no idea. So please jump in and get yourself renewed. We do want you to be getting all those services, but also we really want you to support the great work. So big thanks to everybody who's already jumped in this year. And we did have a nice response of groups who just sent in their renewal automatically. And thanks for that. We'll keep an eye out on our listserv for when the next events are coming up. We have some good ideas about what to do and are working on scheduling them, and we'll keep you informed on all those activities. Most important is right now is if you could make sure that your agency is signing on to the sign-on letter for HUD housing counseling funding for FY23, and we really want to have a good showing this year, and we do use that as a tool, and the appropriators do look at it, and it has a real value for us in trying to get the word out that you should have dramatically more funding in your program. The good news is that we're hearing about support from Republicans and Democrats, and in the House and in the Senate, and so we're hope to have do better this upcoming year in all of that. So with that quick note, thanks everybody for a great call, and thanks to HUD for really spending some time with us. We will talk with you all soon.